Hey everyone, I'm Miss Susan and this is Let's Sew Kids. Today we're going to talk about the sewing tools that you want to have when you get started sewing. These are really the most helpful ones for beginner sewers and the ones I use in my classes. So let's get ready, get set, and let's get started. So to get started, we are going to talk about scissors. These are a pair of fabric shears. Are fabric scissors. You can tell that they are fabric shears by the fact that the handle is two different sizes and they have this bend in it. It allows you to sew your fabric without having to lift it up off the table. It gives you a much more accurate cut. The thing about fabric scissors is you want to use them only for fabric. You don't want to cut paper, you don't want to cut cardboard or aluminum foil or your homework, because that's going to dull these blades, and once they get dull, they're not going to cut your fabric properly. So keep those, mark them. I mark mine with usually my name on it, and these are just for my fabric. Next, you'll want to have a pair of thread clips. Thread clips are just a small pair of scissors. Again, they're also sharp. Use them to clip threads. You can use them to clip into corners, clip in any little tight spots that the fabric shear is a little bit too big to use. Again, these are also sharp, but you can use them for thread, but don't use them for any of your paper or anything like that. Lastly, these two are a pair of fabric shears, or were. They have the two different sizes on the handles and the bend. However, they were used for cutting paper, cutting, all kinds of things other than fabric. Now they don't cut fabric very well anymore. They really chew the fabric. So these have become my paper scissors. I've marked them as such with a marker, and I keep these around to cut patterns, to cut anything I need that is not fabric related. Your next tool is going to be your seam gauge. It is a 6-inch ruler with a slide for measuring short spaces like hems, like seam allowances. Any short measurements, you can set the length or width you need with a slide, and it gives you a quick visual of the measurement that you're working with. It stays in place until you're ready to set it again. You don't have to look carefully at all the markings when you're working with it. Here's an example of it. I have it set at 1 inch. I have a little inch hem. I can measure it all the way down, make sure I have an accurate setting. Next is going to be your tape measure. For longer measurements, you would use this for measuring patterns, measuring fabric. If you're going to make yourself a garment, then you want to measure yourself so you know what size you're wearing. They're usually 60 inches long. There are some that are 120. Just depends on what you need, but 60 is the most common. There's inches on one side and metric on the other. You would use this, you'll use this a lot for measuring the longer areas, more than the 6 inches on your seam guide. Next, I want to talk about marking tools. You're going to use marking tools to mark maybe where you're going to cut, where you're going to sew something, where you're going to join a couple pieces of fabric. And you want to have marking tools that are going to come out of the fabric once you use them. These actually are chalk markers, and so they will come out very easily. The one thing you don't want to do is use ballpoint pen, permanent marker, or regular pencil, because it's not going to come out of your fabric, and these will. And I like to keep around some for light fabrics and some for dark fabrics, because they come in different colors for a reason, because different colors are more visible on different colors of fabric. Next, I want to talk about pincushions. I have two here. One's magnetic. It makes it easy to clean up when pins are knocked down, or if you haven't put them into the pincushion in the first place. This is the little tomato. That's a very common one you see around. I've got several of them I've accumulated over the years. But these are just a couple of your basic pincushions. On there are pins. These are straight pins. I like to use these in my beginner classes because they have brightly colored heads on them. They're long and they're easy to use, so that's why I like to have those. Another thing I like to have when I'm sewing are safety pins. The larger one I use to thread elastic or cord into something I'm working on. The smaller one I'll use usually to hold things together. Maybe I just want to hold something together without getting poked with the straight pins, so I'll use the smaller safety pin. And then hand sewing needles. In sewing, you'll use hand sewing needles as well as working with your sewing machine. This is a nice assortment of different sizes and types of needles, so you have everything you need depending on the job you're working on. This little tool is a seam ripper. We all use it. I use it now. I've been sewing for a long time, so never feel bad about using this. It does exactly what it is called. It takes out seams. It rips seams. There's a tiny little knife that will cut your thread. Maybe you've made a mistake in your seam. Maybe you've decided you want to change something up and you need to take the stitches out. It has a little point that gets under the stitch, and then the knife comes down and cuts it. Usually you'll see it packaged like that with the lid on it, but you can take that top off and now you have a little bit longer handle to work with. I keep a lot of them around because sometimes I'm making mistakes, sometimes I change my mind of what I'm doing, and this makes it easy to get those stitches out without damaging the fabric. Lastly, I want to talk about the iron. Pressing is really, really important with sewing. You can cover a whole lot of mistakes with good pressing. Now, pressing differs from ironing, and that ironing is when you're doing your laundry. It's a little more aggressive, and you're using you're ironing to get wrinkles out of fabric. In pressing, you're actually putting a fold back in. You're setting it so it's flat. And you're not going over it like that. Again, it really, when you press something, even if there's a little bit of something you don't like about it, it can really disappear with really good pressing. So I keep a steam iron. This is actually my travel iron, so it's a little bit smaller. But I have a steam iron in my sewing room. I keep it set up all the time, and I use it all the time. So it's something you want to make sure that you have available and you use it. So that's it. Those were the basic tools you want to have when you get started sewing. These are the tools that I use most commonly in my beginner classes. Well, there are many, many other sewing tools available, and we'll be touching on those as we go along. But in the meantime, let's get ready, get set, and let's sew.